So I have the honor to introduce our speaker today, and if you haven't met her before, she's become a familiar face to the CLF family, for which I'm very grateful for. If you are new to Sally, I think you'll enjoy her talk very much today, and I can share that my staple story that I created for myself this morning was my boll weevil story. So you'll get that in just a little while. But before we go there, I'm going to do a little introduction of Reverend Sally. And she realized as a very young child that she had an unquenchable desire to know God. And at the age of 10, which was just about 10 years ago, she attended her first New Thought church. It immediately resonated with her with the spiritual principles, and she knew that she was destined to live a spiritual life. Kind of cool, because not all of us get that at 10. She's been a minister since 1998, and most recently served as a senior minister of the New Visions Center for Spiritual Living just up the street here. She's also currently a focus minister for the Centers of Spiritual Living. And she's very passionate about the end of life. Reverend Sally is a trained bereavement counselor, and she's ministered in hospices and is a bereavement counselor at a funeral home. She's also served with the Trauma Intervention Program, which is an organization where citizen volunteers respond to traumatic incidents at the request of local police, fire, and hospital personnel to assist those who have been emotionally traumatized. That's a pretty important role. Reverend Sally also writes daily guides and articles for both the Science of Mind and Creative Thought magazine, and is about to do something good for herself, and that is write her own book. So we'll be very excited to see that as it forms itself. So if I can invite Reverend Sally up, and if you guys want to warm your hands up again, we're going to give her a little love. Your boll weevil has already touched my life, and I know it will touch others. Your humor is contagious. Your love is throughout everything you do. And your words are magic to our ears so that we can learn to live differently and take that life out into others. So I thank you, and we thank you for being that delivery of light. Thank you.
You'll be getting a check later for the comment about me being only in it for 10 years. Oh, looking back to 20 years old, wow. In a lot of ways, you'd never want to go back to 20, would you? Most of us were pretty clueless at 20. Well, thank you, Reverend Tim, for that introduction. And thank you all for so warmly welcoming me. I am grateful also to Dr. Michelle for inviting me to be here. They are all on retreat today. And isn't it nice that we can give her some time to do that? And I get to step in her very big shoes this morning and fill those. And today, my talk is about the end of our story. The end of our story. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about what that really means. But let's start by saying, turn to your neighbor, and would you say, it's time for you to give up your story. And now turn back and say, I'm ready to give up my story. So the reason I have you all do that is because you know that when you say it, give the vibration of the words, guess what? You have declared it. You have declared it. We have now put that into law when you say, I'm ready to give up my story. And I'm going to start by sharing a story on myself. And as all good stories start, once upon a time. So once upon a time, a few years ago, I was living back on the East Coast. It was before I moved here to Phoenix. And I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and I was getting ready to leave town. I was going on a trip, so you know how you're all busy and you're trying to get packed, and you've got so many things to do before you leave. And I was having an issue with my neck, and so I asked my chiropractor, can I come and see you the day before I leave, because I'd like to just be feeling really good and in alignment. He said, of course. He said, but my schedule's really busy, so it'll have to be at 7:30 that night. I said, okay, that's fine. So 7:30, I'm driving there, and I left my home. I was in the midst of packing, and I get to the chiropractor's office, and I go up, and I pull on the door, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's locked. And I'm like, oh, my God. I know he told me 7:30. But guess what? I went into my story. Oh, my God, I drove all the way here, and he forgot about me. Has anyone in this room ever done that? You're often running to the races in your story, and I was like indignant. That self-righteous feeling of, oh, I can't believe he did that to me. And so I started immediately getting into that space. I could have been doing so many other things at home, and I left, and I wasted all this time. I can't believe he did that. I get in my car, and of course, what happens when we're in story? We want to share our story with somebody, right? Because misery loves company. So I dial my phone, and I call my friend, and I'm like, you're not going to believe what just happened to me. And I start telling my story, and she said, Sally, it's not quite 7:30 yet. I went, oh, okay. She was right. It was like 7:29. And here I am already driving home. I turned around, went back, pulled into the parking lot. Literally 30 seconds after I get into the parking lot, in pulls my chiropractor. He hops out of his car. Hi, how you doing? Great to see you. Are you ready to have your adjustment? I felt about this big because my story was all wrong. I had the wrong story. I thought someone had forgotten about me, got up on my high horse, as my mother used to say, and I was completely wrong about it. I found out even more how much more wrong I was when I went in and he was giving me my adjustment. And he told me how he had come from his office. We were in his Columbia office. He had a Frederick, Maryland office, which was about 45 minutes away. And then he had to drive back home because he'd come all the way in. Then he had to turn around and drive back because he lived in southern Pennsylvania. He had gone about 2 hours out of his way for me. Then I felt really small, because I knew that this kind and generous man had offered to come out of his way and treat me because I was leaving town, and then that was taking away from his family time. So I was very humbled by that, and I realized, wow, how many times have I gotten the story wrong? How many times when I thought what appeared to be happening really wasn't happening at all? So that's what we're going to talk about this morning, that we have moments where we get caught up in our story that are so far off the dime of where it is really happening. And how can we prevent that from happening and get back to that place of true alignment with the universe really does have our back. The universe had my back big time that night with a kind and generous man who went out of his way. I just didn't know it until he got there. So the truth was that the universe was lovingly providing me with what I needed. I had to open my eyes to take a look and see that. Have you ever gotten caught up in your story? I think we all have. And unfortunately, many of us can take a story and we can hold on to it for years. Years. Anybody with me on that one? The old he done me wrong or she done me wrong story. I must admit, I have had a couple of those in my lifetime. And yet what we're doing is we are actually steeping and marinating in that story rather than allowing ourselves to lift to a higher vibration and seeing that all along the universe did have our back. Are we willing to rise to that level today? Are we really willing to rise to the level of letting go of what our stories might have meant to us at one time? I heard Michael Beckwith talk about how we move through our stages of consciousness. And of course, he talks about the 4 stages. I always teach this in Foundations where we start in the victimhood consciousness. Life is happening to me. And before we get into the manifestation consciousness where life happens by me. And so he talks about how many people stay in that victimhood consciousness. And he said, you cannot have what you are not willing to become. And what he means by that is if we want more love in our life, we have to become that love. If we want more prosperity in our life, we have to become that prosperity, because the truth is we already are that. Would you agree? A few of you would. Would you agree? Yes. And so we have to step into that vibration, and what happens when we're in story is that we let that vibration fall down to a level that is not becoming of us. That's in the lack and limitation. That's certainly where I was that night, waiting for my chiropractor. But I could see that really the universe was vibrating way up here if I simply allowed myself to be in that space. You and I have the opportunity every time we get to a place of story to step into the vibration, the higher vibration of love and invitation and alignment with the one. You see, story keeps us stuck. It keeps us stuck in the past. Sometimes it's described as holding on to baggage. You know, if you come into a relationship with baggage, you usually have a story or two to tell. But the Buddha has a wonderful saying. The Buddha says, you will not be punished by your anger, or for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. And isn't that the truth of what I was experiencing? I was punishing myself big time. I had moved into a place where I didn't need anyone else punishing me. I was right there. I had created my own personal hell. And I was rolling around in it until someone lovingly said, wait a minute, Sally, there might be another way here. And isn't that what we do in community? What we do in community is we remind ourselves of the truth even when we get stuck there sometime. Ernest Holmes actually takes it a step further. He says, merely to abstain from wrong thinking is not enough. There must be active right thinking. So it's not just enough to say, I'm not going to dwell in story. We have to rewrite the script of what we think that might be. How can we then look at this as a loving opportunity to grow our hearts, to expand our consciousness? Even when someone might be doing something hurtful to us, it gives us the opportunity to say, I'm bigger than this. We are all bigger than this. We get to stand and play in the field of love. Many people, when they come in the doors here for the first time, they actually have tears running down their face because they've never been in a field of unconditional love like this before. And so we see people many times actually crying from that, and it's opening people's hearts. And that's our job here in community, because Dr. Michelle is talking about community all this month, that we have the opportunity to lift each other up. I know there's many times when many of us wake up on Sunday mornings and go, man, I don't feel like going today. Am I the only one that ever happens to? But those are the days when you come. Aren't you glad you came? You're like, oh my God, I would have missed this. I would have not filled myself up with the opportunity to be in this space of unconditional love. You know, there's an old proverb that says, when the tide rises, all boats rise. And that's what we seek in community here. When we come in on Sundays, we know that no matter how low we might be feeling, we will be lifted up by the group consciousness. We will be lifted up by a caring smile, or a hello, or a hug. That's the opportunity we get to play in this stream of consciousness that says we are one. Because too many times when we get caught in our story, there's me and there's you. That's what we call separation in New Thought. And isn't that where hell really is? When we forget that we're one. And I had forgotten that I was one that night. I had forgotten that the one is always, the universe always has my back. Always. So this is a place here in spiritual community where we can be ourselves and be loved exactly for who we are. So I want to tell you about a community that decided that they were not going to stay in the hell of what was happening in their world. This is a place. There we go. This is called a town called Enterprise, Alabama. It's a little tiny town. I've actually been here. This is the main street. This is about as close to a Mayberry kind of like town you'll find. This fountain and statue are literally right in the middle of the main street. The cars have to drive around it. And what is significant about this is this woman and this statue is holding something. It's a bug. And this bug is called a boll weevil. Anyone ever heard of a boll weevil? They are an insect that came up from South America. Can you hand me that cough lozenge? Thank you. So the boll weevil came up from South America back in the early 1900s. And somehow it got to the South. And the boll weevil really likes to eat cotton, which was a major crop, still is a major crop in the South. So the boll weevil starts eating, literally, all the crops. This is affecting the livelihood of every farmer. So now their crops are destroyed. They have no money. So the farmers literally were like, what do we do? This was their own version of a story, their own version of hell. So the farmers got together and they decided, you know what? There is another way here. There is another way. Excuse me. My boll weevil is draining my sinuses right now. So I know that this boll weevil is going to go away. Send me some energy. So they got together, the farmers got together. And as they did, they said, there's got to be a better way. What can we do? Because the cotton crops are destroyed. And someone said, we could plant another crop. What if we plant peanuts? Okay, let's plant peanuts, which they did. It turns out that peanuts actually, per acre, yielded far more crops. They made more money off of peanuts. So not only were they more prosperous because they changed the crops, they were actually giving the soil some rest because you're supposed to diversify your crops. So it was a plus in many, many ways. And now again, they had the prosperity that they'd enjoyed before the boll weevil came. And the boll weevil didn't seem to like peanuts, so it left the peanuts alone. So Enterprise, the city of Enterprise, decided they were going to show their appreciation. So they actually put a monument up that's still up there today. And this monument was erected in 1919. And here's what it says. In profound appreciation of the boll weevil and what it has done as the herald of prosperity, this monument was erected by the citizens of Enterprise. They erected this for the boll weevil. Is that not wonderful? Because they had seen the devastation that the boll weevil had created. They held on to the idea there was something more out there, something more for them. And a herald it's a messenger, it's a sign. And so they call it the herald of prosperity. They knew that there was something more if they just held on and let go of the story of how their crops were decimated. Because of that, they came through in miraculous ways and they had even more prosperity. So some of you, many of you, may be experiencing your own boll weevil in your life right now. You might have a story going on that is, my life is over. The boll weevil is damaging the very fabric of my life. That could be your breakthrough, my friends. This is your chance to claim your herald of prosperity. Because you know, that wonderful old phrase came from this experience. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I wanted to see if you were paying attention. So the boll weevil is just yet another representation that we too have the opportunity to see something that looks really awful in our lives and go, wait a minute, this could be the best thing that ever happened to me. If I simply hold to that vibration that I am love, that I am prosperity, I will not lower my vibration to the level of story. I will let that go. Nature also can show us wonderful opportunities and examples of community, working for the common good. I used to live on the Gulf Coast in Pensacola, Florida, not too far from Enterprise. And we had plenty of hurricanes come through. And one time after a hurricane, there was a huge, my backyard was basically flooded. And I looked out the window, and I saw this giant clump of something, and I was looking at it, and what is that? And so I waded out to it just to see what it was, and I found out it was a clump of fire ants. And I thought, well, they must be dead. But then I saw that there were ants walking on the top. So I looked at it and thought, that's interesting. So I did a little bit more reading about fire ants. And what I discovered was this, that fire ants have an innate sense within them. One fire ant will drown if it's put in the water. It'll drown. But when the fire ant colony sees or senses, they don't know how they do it, but they sense that water is coming and is going to flood their mound, they literally will take the queen, they'll take the food and the eggs, the larvae, out, and they will form this life raft of ants. Some are on the bottom, some are on the top. But their whole idea is that they are there to protect the queen, and if we look at that metaphorically, the queen being the feminine, creative energy of who we are, and the eggs, the spiritual nourishment. Are we still surrounding ourselves with nourishment? These ants then form this, and the ones on the bottom do not drown. They take turns on this floating raft. Because we know that water doesn't always stay up. It's got to go back down again. And so they just simply ride it out, and they wait. They protect their queen. They protect their food. They protect their eggs. And then they go back and they make another mound. This is how community comes together for them. Isn't that a wonderful example? That they are there to protect that which is important. So are we doing that when we have a situation that comes into our life, a story? Are we protecting ourselves by surrounding ourselves with community that uplifts us? And are we nourishing ourselves with good spiritual food? That's important. That's really important. Albert Einstein had this to say: hidden within every problem lies an opportunity so powerful that it literally dwarfs the problem. Do you believe that? A few of you do. Do you believe that? Yes. And all it takes is opening our hearts and our minds to a greater expression of what might really be going on in our lives. You see, that is the beauty of spiritual progress. Sometimes you don't know you're making progress, and you look back and you go, man, I haven't come very far. And then all of a sudden, boom, you get literally pulled into something greater if we are willing to ride out the tide. If we're willing to be there and say, wait a minute, I know that there's good here somewhere. I can't see it yet, but I'm willing to hold on to that and let go of whatever story I might be creating around that. This is why community is so important. When you come through these doors every week, whether it's for Sunday service, for class, you have the opportunity to be in with great minds. Because how many people are sitting in this room? One. That's a trick question. There's only one of us in this room. There's many forms of that one, but there's only one of us. And yet we have to remind ourselves again and again of that oneness. That is your lifelong goal, is to learn oneness. That I'm not separate from anybody else in this room or anybody else on this planet. I am one. And despite opportunities of unkindness or unskilled behavior is what I really like to call it. When someone is showing you unskilled behavior because they're not kind, they're not generous, they're not loving, it's simply unskilled. I can still be the one who is skilled. Does that make sense? I can lift myself up to a higher vibration, or I can stay in that vibration and not let myself fall into a story of othering other people. That is so easy to do, isn't it? To other someone else. It's a daily, constant reminder for me to stay with the one. Ernest Holmes talks about that in 10,000 Ways in the textbook. How do we stay with the one? That's the ultimate goal here. So many of us stay on the sidelines of life, and Spirit keeps calling us, come play in the game. The game that we're playing can be at a much higher level, a playing field, if we simply allow it. So the last story I want to share with you today is one where another community came through in an amazing way. And it starts in a beautiful town called Middlebury, Connecticut. Very quaint, picturesque town. And it's most known because it's home to Middlebury College, which is a small, private, liberal arts college. And the most distinguishing characteristic of this college is that one day, this man, Roger Ralph, that's what he looks like today, back in 1960, he looked very different. He was a sophomore. He was a high school player. And so Roger was driving home from the football game. As he's driving along the road, it started to snow. And he happened to see a woman who was pushing a wheelchair with a young man in it on the sidewalk. She was trying to, but because of the snow, it was getting harder and harder, and she was having a really difficult time. And so Roger, being the caring young man that he was, stopped. And he started talking with them. He found out that this was a mother and son. The mother told Roger that her son, Butch, who was 13 at the time, had been born with cerebral palsy. He could not walk. He had real trouble moving his legs. His arms and his hands were very tightly constricted. He had very limited use of them. And so he was confined to this wheelchair. But he loved football. He just loved football. And they lived there in that town. And he loved going to their football games. It was very difficult because his mother had to do pretty much everything for him. But she wanted to provide Butch with whatever she could. So Roger heard this story. And he thought, wow, here's a young man who thought the world of him, because as soon as he found out he was a football player, that elevated him in Butch's eyes immediately. And Roger said, you know what, I'm going to promise you that for the rest of this season, I will get you to the game and I'll take you back home. And so he and his buddies, his football buddies, would go to the home of Butch, pick him up, take him out in his wheelchair to the car, put him in, put the wheelchair in, take him. They would sit him right there on the sidelines. And Butch was in heaven because he was talking with everybody that came along, with the football players, with the cheerleaders, with the coaches, with the students, anybody who would come along. He was just in his heavenly place because this allowed him the opportunity to be one with everyone else. So the football season ended. Well, then there was basketball season. So he said, I'd love to go to the basketball games. So the football players started taking him to the basketball games, and then the basketball players the following year took him to the football games. That's been going on since 1960. So what has happened is the tradition now is it's called picking up Butch. And here he is with a recent win by the basketball team. He's right there. He goes to pretty much everything that they do at the college. He is such a part of this community that I saw the athletic director being interviewed, and he said, what we are teaching these students goes way beyond what you can learn in a classroom. What we are teaching them is that we are all one. What we're teaching them is that there is a community here that doesn't let anyone doesn't let anyone feel not included. And isn't that a beautiful story when most students are thinking, well, I'm going to go out and get drunk this weekend. They're thinking, I've got to go pick up Butch. And I've got to be there. And the friendships that he's made go way beyond even the teams. One of the young women that he became friends with ended up, she's the one on the top right there, she ended up befriending him and tutoring him, and he got his GED. So Roger, that day in 1960, could have had a story that said, I'm really busy today. I've just played a long football game. I'm tired. I want to go home. But he didn't. He stopped because he was embodying the love that he is. And from that stop and his decision to create a space for Butch at the football games, Butch could have bought into a story that he was less than. He could have bought into, well, I was born with cerebral palsy. There's not much I can do about it. I can just sit in my room. But he said, no, I want to be out there. I'm ready. And he created the space for that to happen. Do you see how the universe responds if we simply allow it? So I invite you to look at this community in this way. This is another inclusive community that says we include all. And we want to lift up every single person who walks in these doors. We want this to be a safe place to be yourself, no matter what it is. We're all here to hold each other up. That's what community is about. And that's what letting go of our story is. That there's not many of us, there is one of us. We're picking up Butch in our own way here, aren't we? We're picking up Butch because we're showing up and we're loving each other to the highest level of our capability. So let's take that into prayer. And so we accept right here and right now that life is indeed for us. That life is moving us through a series of events in our lives that sometimes may look like we've got a boll weevil in our life. But we can simply claim that there is something more waiting for us to grow into, to expand into. And so that our breakdown in our life can indeed become our breakthrough. I know that each and every person here in this community right now is lifting themselves up into the highest level of consciousness. I claim that for them. That no matter what struggle they might be experiencing in their life, there is something more. And so we lift our spiritual eyes to that place that knows that there is only one. And that one is always love, power, passion, beauty, joy. That is who we are here to be. There is no struggle in God. There is nothing that is holding us back except ourselves. And so I now release whatever blocks there might be within each individual's mind in here, that we let go and simply allow ourselves to be the channels of prosperity, the channels of love, the channels of wisdom, the channels of power. It is done right now. Anything that is not of God, we simply banish back into the nothingness from which it came. And so I declare for each and every person here that now is the time and we are the people. We are here to be that which we became to be, which is light and love and power. And so it shows up in ways that might really take us beyond our comfort zones. And we simply allow that and let go of whatever story there might be around that, knowing that the highest story is, I am here to be an instrument for good. And so we simply let it be so. We know that all that came before today is now showing up and saying yes to our highest good. And we can claim it. Claim our good. Know that it is there for us. We simply reach out and say yes. And so we let it be so. And together we say, and so it is.